Hey, what's up guys, it's Bronson. Now in today's video, this is something that is quite requested in the comments of a lot of my videos. So today I'm going to be explaining all about my ink wash. I'm going to explain why I felt the need to step away from that traditional grey wash for my realistic tattoos, and why I felt the need to push something a little bit more like a whitewash and these opaque style tones. I'm going to show my setup, and most importantly, I'm going to show you guys how to use this ink set. But enough of all that, let's get into it. Okay guys, so first off, it's really important that we talk about why I felt the need to create this style of ink. I feel like black and grey can often look quite dull in comparison to colour, showing more than just charcoal-like values. With the use of whitewash and opaque style pigments, now I have a tool to put life into the tattoo where I see fit. And something great to compare it to is, have you ever seen those full black and grey tattoos, but then the artist will decide to put in like a really bright colour, usually a really bright orange or that turquoise type of blue. It's such a great effect and such a contrasting technique to use, but I always feel like those colours never really belong there. The only purpose of that is to create that contrast like effect in the tattoo. But that's where I think a heavy opaque really sits well in the tattoo. All you need to do is match that value, so now you're not tearing away from any realistic aspect of the tattoo. All you're doing is replacing that value in an area that you think is important, and now making that come to life through that more opaque style ink. And with that, now your tattoo has a nice contrasting factor. With realism, it's always my goal to recreate my reference, if not better. And quite often with grey wash, I'd look at my finished tattoo, it would look great, but it was still a few steps away from that reference that I saw on my iPad or even printed on my reference paper. I felt like this was unachievable with my normal grey wash, and overall just missing that exact value that my reference was showing me and I was working so hard to recreate. And a lot of these tones start to react a lot like colour. I know that I can pack my lightest and extra light tone and it's not going to go too much past it. The same way, if you tattoo a red and keep packing it, you just get to a point where that area is fully saturated and completely packed. That value stops changing and there's no change in the color as well. So that's already giving me a really true tone, and it does heal very closely to that fresh result. And I feel like, as we all know, that's not really too true if you wash down black or use your grey wash. If you do keep passing over that area, you do step that value up and create something a little bit darker. So if you want a really solid and really saturated tattoo, which I like to create, I feel like this is a really great method for that. I can pick my true value and confidently pack that and pass that through the tattoo. And you might be thinking, why not just use a whitewash if that's what I'm wanting to do? Now, I always find that after about 2 hours, all the white in my ink cap has dropped down. So that's always a little bit of a flaw and something that you can't really get past unless every 40 minutes or an hour you want to be mixing your ink cap, which I don't want to be doing. I'm all about a productive tattoo session. So I find having my opaque tone there, I can actively mix whatever I need. Obviously, I never mix it with my black, but from my extra light tone to my darkest tone, I can then dip that into my value and then into my opaque tone, and then I return that into the value. Yeah, I want to kind of create that balance. And that way, it's actively mixing that opaque with my whitewash in the cartridge. I believe that for now, this is the best way to create an accurate and impressive realistic tattoo. And it's really providing me just more tools and more mixes I can create within my simple ink palette to make my work better and stand out in a really saturated market. Okay guys, so we'll just talk a little bit about how I use this ink and where it becomes really powerful. So I have my palette set up here from my dark all the way to my light. So this is the extreme ink wash set. We have my extra light, my medium, my dark, and then I use the dynamic triple black. I'm currently using the Star Bright white, and this is Extreme's opaque light. And then just some water here as well, for just to help with like rinsing a little bit. I do wash my needle with my water bottle mostly. So I don't use my opaque on my black. Where it's most useful is from my extra light up to my dark. And like we talked about, it's a great way to give shadows some life. So even with my opaque and my dark, it still creates a really nice, interesting tone. But I'll start with mixing some of my lighter ones so my ink doesn't get too contaminated. So again, I just dip into my light, then into my opaque quickly, and then I hold that into my light value here. And you should be able to see the nice value that we've created here. See, that's sitting as a really true tone. It's really easy to read. Now I can just rinse this out a little bit. Now one value that I really like is using my mid-tone, hitting my opaque, and then into my light. We have a really interesting value here. Something that's a bit darker than what we had created before. And if you want to step that up again, we can go from our dark to our opaque to our mid. And there we have a little bit of a darker value. Or we can even hit a little bit of black, just like a touch, pick up a little bit into our dark, into our opaque, back into here. And then let's see what we've created. I'm not sure if you can see on camera, but this is a really nice soft step up from all of our values. Another thing that makes this ink really good is when we're working onto an area where our extra light tone or light tone is stepping into the blank skin, into our extra light and then just into our opaque. This is a really great tone that provides a lot of life again, and is a great tool to use where these light tones go into nothing or that negative space. So you can imagine on your reference, this is a really accurate value that does sit there. And now I'll just show you our light, opaque, and then here. Now I always want to hold into my last dip because that's keeping it a little bit more of a whitewash. If you go opaque first and then just hit your tone, it's still just really, it's too opaque, you know? So just rinsing this out a little bit. So keeping it a black and grey, you know? So dip this into your value, a small hit of opaque, and then wherever you need to go. Now I do always like to go into my darker tone first, and then opaque, and then stepping into something lighter. But I feel like I've got so much diversity on choices now with my palette. So now we'll talk a little bit about how to use the setup. It's really important that if you want to use this opaque styled inks, that you have a really strong fundamental of the basics, packing black and everything like that. Because with these techniques, I really need to focus on how well my black is packed in there, making sure I'm not touching any of my negative space, and the use of white. And I really feel like it's true that all these areas and fundamentals need to be perfect for you to even bother using this ink set for you to try and excel your work. It'll just be best for you to focus on those basics and fundamentals first. This is quite an advanced technique, and I really don't see any need for anyone that's in their early years of tattooing to try this or bring this on board to what they're doing. And it could actually do damage to your career if you try and take something like this on without having these basic understandings. It's good to just focus on these fundamentals, and then you can always bring something like this into your tattooing later down the line. Be a little bit responsible there and see when you're ready to bring this into your tattooing. And with my blacks packed well, all my negative space clear and area for the white, I can now focus on having fun with these amazing values that we've created. I can enjoy mixing my level of opaque tone that I'm putting into my different values and just focusing on creating an accurate value. So majority of the time I'll dip the same amount of opaque into my cartridge, and my process for that is dipping into my value that I need or slightly darker than, then into my light opaque, and then I'll dip back into that same value or a touch lighter. Now I really feel like it's great. It's giving me a lot of mixing power, the same way you do with a color palette or when you're painting. I feel like now I have so much more control and option in how I'm using my tattoo palette. And dipping into my ink before my opaque and then again after is done for the reason that I still want to create a black and gray style tattoo. I don't want to do a full opaque tattoo. So I want to create something that is like 90% a whitewash or a black and gray wash ink. But that opaque is mixed through the cartridge to keep that ink really active and alive. The same way I said in the start of this video, if you're using whitewash, quite often that settles to the bottom of your ink cup. So I'm actively trying to keep that pigment in my cartridge. It's really just creating the ultimate whitewash set. And I also only use a light opaque because I feel like that value is a lot closer to the inks that I'm mixing with than a white would be. White can really disturb the value of the ink that you're trying to make and your whole palette in general. If I'm sitting with a light opaque, it's so much more relevant and really neighboring a lot of these inks that I'm mixing with. So you can see a lot more unison when you're mixing all these tones up. And overall, that's something that I'm so passionate about, and I wouldn't have even made this video if I didn't feel this way. But I just feel like now I have so much more option when I'm mixing with my inks. And a great place to use this is really in your lighter pigments, and also in an area that's saturated in the tattoo, but sometimes you do that with your grey wash, and now that object is really pushed out of the picture and has stepped into kind of a weird ground from foreground and background. With this opaque, there's enough brightness and life in that pigment now to still keep that aspect that you're tattooing really relevant in your piece. You can also play with the levels and placement on where you put this. I saw a few years ago a lot of artists were using opaque in their backgrounds as a great way to kind of push these two images away from each other. And I don't know if you guys oil paint, but you can also create that nice bond where your background starts to wash over your main image. And with grey wash, when you do that with a light tone, it just becomes a really random and confusing area. But the life in this opaque tone really starts to create that true look on how it should be. This is also especially great for some of your really lightly saturated areas that are important features, such as the eyes. I never really leave too much white in the eyes, and I try to always saturate the whites of the eyes slightly. So this opaque value is great for that. It's showing the viewer of the tattoo that this is still an important area because it doesn't have a boring tone wash through it. The same way if I were to use an orange or a blue and just throw that into the eyes of a black and grey tattoo, that's now standing out. And this opaque does the same thing. And the same with the softness on the edge of the lips. Using a little bit more of this opaque tone really gives that fluidity of the ink the same as color, allowing you to kind of blend and blur things a lot easier, I find. Alright guys, thank you for making it to the end of the video. I hope today we all learned something, and maybe this is something that you can bring into your own tattooing or make your own similar setup. I think it's just really important that we all start thinking actively about ways to make something more realistic. What is the step missing from my tattoo looking like my reference or like that real life object? But make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. I'm gonna start posting content every Saturday. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.